Very good. All righty. So, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Oh, that's not bad. That's not bad. It is Wednesday, though. You guys should be pretty well rested at this stage. Welcome to 3D Foundations. Hopefully, you guys are as excited to learn this material as I am to teach it to you. We have both a live and an online component. Good morning, Internet. So hopefully you guys are all logged in. And by the way, if you wish, you may also view the lecture through the online link. And if you're, for example, a little shy and maybe don't want to ask questions out loud, you can type questions into the chat box. And Brian, my lovely assistant, will help out in reading off the questions. So if you would rather communicate that way, that's totally fine too. But I encourage you to raise your hands and ask questions. And that's you too, Internet. I would love for you guys to ask questions. I like to think of questions as bonus information because I might go into something that I wasn't even planning on talking about as a result of some really good questions that you guys bring up. And typically what happens is if one of you has this question, many of you have this same question. So it's a great idea to get those things out there and start talking to each other, communicating and sharing because this is definitely a team sport. If I could make you guys work in little groups, I would do it. We're going to get more into working in teams and help, and the online help in particular, which is available to both the local class as well as my Internet buddies. So make sure you guys are tapping into that if and when you need it. And that's a great environment to work in teams. You don't even have to be at the same house. But if you decided to get together and have pizza and work on Maya, I'd be totally fine with that too. But the virtual environment, also a very good one to work together in groups. And the reason I say that that's a strong way to work is because if everybody remembers something, you can kind of help each other. And I'll let you in on a little secret. You never understand material better than when you have to teach it to someone else. So in teaching, you will gain a greater understanding of the material that you think you understand at this point. And it will only make you stronger at what it is you do. So I recommend very highly teaching someone if you can, because that helps you as well, not to mention making a great friend. Alrighty, so we have a lot to talk about today. It's going to be a pretty full day. They're always pretty full. We go right up to the rim in terms of information. So be prepared. We're going to talk about a lot. I'm going to try to address all of your questions. I know you have a ton of them at this point. But what I'll do is periodically I'll stop and I'll say, hey, I'm going to open up the floor for some questions. And I would prefer that we kept the questions to the stuff we're talking about at the moment and try not to go too far on tangents. And then we'll get into sections where we can go into, okay, now let's talk about things that are, totally off topic on what we were talking about. So I will give you a chance to do that as well. But I want to make sure we get through the material today and we're not missing anything in order to be successful with our assignments. Does that make sense? All right. Can I get a hell yeah? Yeah. Whoa, that was a good hell yeah for the first one. I have good feelings about this. We'll see how this goes. Let's get into today's material. All righty, so welcome to 3D Foundations. Your 3D career starts here. Probably one of your big questions is, who am I going to be working with on this crazy journey? And we have a couple of different team members. And incidentally, I asked everyone on the team to make their own little Lego people. So this is a Lego person, and this is what Marcus thinks he looks like if he was a Lego person. We'll see if you can pick him out. But a little bit of background information on him in terms of things that he's interested in. And something that I wanted to put out there is when you take a look at areas of specialty, you'll notice that he mentions different things. And what I'd like to talk about is the idea that these different things represent various stops on the CG production pipeline. By show of hands, how many of you guys have heard of CG production pipeline? A couple of you, okay. And no worries, I teach this class like you know absolutely nothing, so not a big deal if you don't know what that is. But in terms of the CG production pipeline, it works a lot like an automotive assembly line. At one end, you have an empty frame of a car, and at the other end, you have a car you can drive. And what happens is this frame moves through this factory, and it makes a series of stops. And each of these stops is populated by an individual who does one job. They do it really well, and they do it really quickly. Make sense? Okay, CG production pipeline, same idea. I've got an idea over here of what I want to do, and at the other end, I've got a movie, I've got a video game, whatever 3D element I need. Does that make sense? So The production pipeline stops at these different disciplines, and these people, again, they do this one job, they do it really well, and they do it really fast. So, for example, I install doors. The car comes to me, I put the door on. The car comes to me, I put the door on. The car comes to me, I put the door on. And it's a pity that that's kind of the way art is, but art for hire, that's the way art is. But point being, as that stuff gets to me, I do what I do to it, and then it goes to someone else. So there's somebody before me who prepares the work before it gets to me, and if they don't do their job well, I struggle with my job. After I do my job, there are other people who have to deal with what I've done. And as a result, I want to do my job well and prep my work so that the next person has an easy time doing their job. Does that make sense? So we're all part of this big CG production pipeline. We're all working towards the same thing. And there are many different disciplines along that pipeline that appeal to all different kinds of people. This is primarily a polygon modeling class. That's what we will delve into for the most part. We will dabble into some other fun stuff, but just so you know, there's a lot out there. Modeling is just the tip of the iceberg, but typically what people start with, because that's towards the beginning of the CG production pipeline. Make sense? Hell yeah? Okay, good. Let's get into more of this stuff. So again, this is Marcus, or what Marcus thinks he looks like. So feel free to ask him about anything that he's interested in, and or heckle him about things that he plays. This is Sarah, and she is one of the other teachers you'll be working with. And again, this is both online and local. So they are in the help areas online. They will also be in the lab locally. So you'll be running into them all the time. And again, this is what Sarah thinks she looks like as a Lego person. And you can tell she's big into cats. So if you want to get her to talk a lot, talk about cats. Again, these are the things that she's interested in terms of the disciplines that she has strength in. It's unusual to find somebody who both animates as well as models, because they tend to appeal to different personality types. But she can do both, which is terrific, and that's why I've got her in here. So if you have aspirations of animation, she's definitely an amazing resource to tap into. And again, these are some other things that she's interested in. You probably would be able to pick my Lego person out. That's me. And I am still looking for a shirt that looks like that. You can't really tell, but if you zoomed way in there, you would see this is two dancing monkeys. And that would be about the coolest Hawaiian shirt ever. So that's my quest, find that thing. All right, what are we going to be doing this month? We are going to be modeling assets or objects, things that will populate an environment. And we're going to start with working with things that we see every day all around us. And ultimately, what we will do is take these objects that we've built and we will bring them together into a final scene that we've created for you. And you can kind of put them on display in a still life environment. And much like when you're first learning to draw, how many of you guys are illustrators by a show of hands? Okay, good, excellent. When you first start learning to draw, you start with still life because you have to know and understand reality before you can create plausible fantasy. Does that make sense? Fantasy is very heavily steeped in reality. So we need that connection. So we need to be able to look at an object and draw it without interpretation. If we could take the pencil and stick it right to your eye, that would be ideal because there shouldn't be anything in between. Does that make sense? Faithful reproduction, exactly what you see. 3D modeling is the same idea. We are basically 3D copy machines. Give me a 2D image, I will make it into a 3D entity. Does that make sense? Same kind of concept. So we're going to start with still life-like ideas because, again, CG and all digital art really is very heavily steeped in traditional art skills. So if you look for and listen to the things we talk about, you will see the connections, and I try to point them out wherever I can. So we're going, again, for this cool still life of objects that you've created, which you can print out and put on your refrigerator and impress your friends and post it on Facebook, whatever. So all kinds of cool stuff as a result of the work that you will do this month. Now, in terms of the objects that we're building, they will come in 3 levels of complexity. We start with simple objects and we move into more difficult ones. So you have the opportunity to sort of grow and evolve as an artist and, again, learn the tools and the skills it takes to build these objects. So our level 1 assets, or minion level assets, are a little bit on the easier side comparatively. We also have level 2 assets, the boss level assets. And then we get up to the level 3 assets, Supreme Poly Commander. So once you're building your level 3 assets, that's where you get the really cool outfits to wear. All right. Now, if you follow our progression, you will actually be able to build your own Lego person, which is super awesome because we can also make some totally awesome accessories to go with those Lego people. And let me tell you, that is actually pretty fun. Any questions about so far what we've talked about in terms of assets and objects and what we're going to be building and why? No? Okay, don't be shy. Love questions. Nothing? Nothing? All right, time to move the boat. Let's talk about class structure. The class is divided into 2 parts, lecture and lab. And this is the local class, obviously, that we're talking about. The online component, there is lecture as well as the help sessions, which will serve as your labs. So please do attend those. It's going to make a big difference. You know, you can learn from a recording, but it is so much better to talk to a live person. I can't even tell you. Night and day difference in terms of your understanding. So get to those open labs. Gesundheit. In the lecture environment, we're going to be talking about concepts and techniques, tools and strategies, and all of them towards how do we model things. And this is really the ideal time for you to listen very closely, take great notes, and ask questions, you know, interact, learn. This is the best place for that. In terms of the lecture, we've got it structured into basically 2 main parts. There's the part where we deliver information, and then there's the part where we do little exercises. So what happens is I will present you with a tool or an exercise where we're explaining how things work. I will give you a workflow or a concept, and then as a group, we will do an in-class activity. And the activity is based on what we just talked about. So right away, you and I both know if you understood what we just talked about. Because if you listened closely and took great notes, you should be able to bang out these activities, no problem. If you are struggling, you are not attacking this class the way you need to. You are not approaching this class the way you need to retain the information. So we need to start talking about what needs to be done to change that. Does that make sense? Okay, because what we're striving for is active engagement with class material, active learning. So again, after the activity, then we're going to go back to more lecturing. We're going to talk more about new concepts, tools, and then we'll take another break to do more activities. So again, we will move through the class and basically reinforce everything that we talk about right here, right now. Then what happens is at the end of each lecture, we have what we call a skill check. And the skill check is our way to know on a daily basis if you understand what we talked about previously. Because again, if you knew what we talked about today, you can do the skill check, no problem. If you don't know what we talked about today, you can't do the skill check. Now, for my local class, skill checks are going to be due at the beginning of the next class. So today's Wednesday, which means whatever skill check follows today's activity is going to be due on Friday, first thing. Right after attendance, we do the check of the skill check. Does that make sense? Okay, so we know what you did. In terms of my online environment, you guys, all of your skill checks are due on Saturday evening. Again, big warning, all of your stuff is due at once. And for my local guys, not only will I visually check it off, you will submit those to FSL. And they're also due on Saturday, all at once. Luckily, the local class does not have the opportunity to let those pile up and try to do them all in one day, because you have to show me every other day. For my online class, here's where you're going to have to be disciplined, because you can't wait until Saturday to do all of your skill checks. That is just going to be an overwhelming amount of work to see all those lectures and then do all these activities and do them well and easily in one day is nightmarishly difficult. So please don't allow that stuff to pile up on you. Get it done. Again, take an hour or two each day and work on these activities. Get them done. If you wait till Saturday, I almost guarantee you will be overwhelmed. And that's not a challenge. I've taught this class for 10 years. I know what works and what does not typically have success. And I'm trying to guide you towards success, because we don't have that much time for you to figure it out on your own what works best. Does that make sense? I'm saving you the trouble of having to figure it out. This is what works best. So set aside time. Make sure you get it done. All right, as I said, we've got these skill checks, and they reinforce what we talked about. So you do the skill check, you know you're doing great. I know you've had classes where you're like, I think I understand what we're talking about. No gray area. You do the activities, you understand. You do the skill checks, you know what's going on. And these skill checks build up to our weekly assignment. So when we get to the weekly assignment, it is a culmination of all of our skill checks. So again, if you stay on it and you do the things you need to do, you're going to do great. I guarantee it. You're going to do great. All right, we also have, for the local class, a lab environment, and that's where you're going to be working directly with Sarah and Marcus. And that's really the environment where you're getting intensive hands-on, hey, could you sit down next to me for a minute and explain this a little bit better, because I don't think I've got a good grasp of it. And an excellent idea there, if you're in the lab and you have a question, get your notebook out and write down the stuff that Marcus and Sarah are telling you. They are very talented artists, very skilled. They know what they're doing. And again, you don't want to let a beautiful nugget of information get away from you. So write that stuff down. If you had to ask, you have not really retained that. And just the process of writing things down helps you remember. Even if you never go back to the paper, that's fine. But there's a kinesthetic element to taking notes. It will help you. Please do that. So again, when you're in that lab, you can sit down with those guys. For those of you who are in the online, you'll be going to those online lab sessions, which of course the local class can also attend. You can help each other, and we do have scheduled times where there's instructors in there. So take a look at the schedule and see when the instructors are in there specifically. We have a lot of help available. So make sure you're taking advantage of it. In terms of the grading, we grade on several different elements. And what's nice about that is the fact that this will help build your grade. So it's not as if there's like two things that make or break you. There's a lot of different things that you can put points on. So always striving to do better is a great opportunity with, again, many things to do. Now, this is a critical thing for you to understand in terms of the grading of the assets, the objects that you're building. The fact that it looks like the object you're supposed to be building is only worth 1/3 of the grade. So if you look at this, you can see the artistic criteria. Does it look like what it's supposed to look like? Just a tiny fraction over 1/3 in terms of its value. So just because it looks good, do not assume you are done working on your project. That's not enough. As I said, art for yourself is one thing. Art in a pipeline means that you have to prepare your work for someone else. So in terms of this stuff, we have these organizational and technical criteria that are the other 2/3. So not only must it be beautiful, well, not beautiful, I say that with a sort of tongue-in-cheek. Do your best to make it look like the object you're supposed to be building, but realize there are 2 other critically important components that if you do not do, not going to pass. Does that make sense? And the good news is these organizational and technical components are fairly straightforward. They're yes/no things. It's like mow the lawn, brush your teeth. Did you mow the lawn? Yes or no? I can tell if I go look. You know what I mean? It's very straightforward. Hardly any subjectivity to it whatsoever. So you either did it or you didn't. So the good news is if you follow directions well, you're going to do great because you can do 2/3 of the work with minimal input on my part. 1/3 of the work is definitely the artistic component, and that's the stuff you really need to work on, and practice, and learn, because this will be very different from what you've done before. Does that make sense? Get a hell yeah? Hell yeah. Okay, good. Any questions about that stuff so far in terms of what we've talked about? Anything? No? Okay, cool. We'll move the boat again. All right. Now, in terms of this week's objective, I like to show kind of where we're headed before we even get there, because it makes it easier for you to understand the directions. When you have no idea, it's a lot harder. So in terms of this week's objective, our goal is we are going to block out 3 objects, and we are going to model 2 of them. Now, in terms of block out, we're going to get into the details of that, but what we're going to do is use very simple polygon primitives in order to create the shape and form of an object that we're trying to replicate. 2 of the objects we're going to actually try to straight up model, like for really real. And the good news is, in terms of your grading, we are grading the block-out component, which is the easier of the two things to do. But this modeling element, in terms of modeling the objects you're building, that's just sort of a practice, because next week's, week 2, next week's turn-in will be actually modeling objects. So this is kind of your first run at what modeling is like, and it's not going to cost you anything unless you don't do it. If you don't do it, you're going to lose 10 points off the top of your grade. But if you do this activity, again, the modeling part of it, that's going to give you a huge heads up of what we're looking for the week after that. Does that make sense? Opportunity to learn without penalty. This is what we're grading for, straight up. Make sense? Hell yeah? Awesome. Good, good, good. Let's get into today's material. We're going to be talking about a couple of different elements here. We are going to be delving into the Maya interface. It is intimidating. There's a lot going on up there, but it's not that bad. We're going to break it down into what each little area does, and I'm going to draw parallels between the world that you do have some understanding of and what's going on in Maya so that you can have a better understanding. And what I'd really love for you to do when we're doing the interface there, take note of the verbiage I'm using, because Maya is its own language, and I want you to learn this language with me, because when I'm talking, then you understand what I'm saying. And then when you ask me questions, I understand what you're saying, because we're using this language. And there's nothing more frustrating for both of us than when you tell me, how do you get the thingy to go on the who's and what's it's with the thingamajiggers? Wow. And if that's an email, I have no chance of figuring that out. And if I do, let's just say the stars align and I can see what it is you're asking me. I'm going to answer you in Maya speak, right? And then you're going to be like, I don't even know what you said. Now you don't have no chance. So point being, we need to get on the same page, and that's using the right verbiage. Make sense? Hell yeah? Awesome. All right. That was a little bit of a cautious hell yeah, but we'll see. Let's see what goes on. We will also be talking about the importance of reference and the use of polygon primitives, which is our first step towards building that block out. So first things first, organization is of paramount importance. We've already talked about the idea that I'm part of a team, and you know, if you work with a group of people, organization is really important, because we all need to understand what it is we're working on, how we're going to get there, what's the path. So as a result, being organized is a huge piece of where art meets business. Does that make sense? Art for you, you don't have to be organized. It doesn't make any difference. But when you've got art and business, you've got to be organized also. And that's the hard part. Does that make sense? Because we're artists. You know, this part I get. That makes perfect sense. But we also have to be more organized, more precise. We have to have Gesundheit goals. We have to have objectives. And the worst of all things, a deadline. Art with a deadline stinks, Gesundheit. So, but we got to get used to that, because where art and business collide, business wins, because they write the checks and we like to eat. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So what we're going to get into first is we're going to do a little bit of creation of projects so that we can find out, well, how do I create a project folder system? And then how do I let Maya know that this is what I want to work on? And we're going to talk about that. That's called setting the project. We'll also get into some ideas of naming, some important thoughts that you need to have when it comes to the naming process. Again, in terms of the reason we do this is because it helps to organize everything. It streamlines the work process. It gets us through that pipeline much more quickly and efficiently. And again, time is absolutely money. I mean, they can quantify exactly how much something costs Gesundheit per hour. So we need to make sure we're moving with some measure of urgency, because they don't move the deadlines. they almost never move the deadlines.
They do. They move them backwards.
That's true. They will play dumb and go, oh, no, I told you yesterday. Where is that stuff? But yeah, they almost never, and I don't like to use the word never, but they almost never push them up unless somebody really big says so. All right, so let's do a little activity. And whenever you see the activity slide, that means we're going to do something together as a group. And what's going to happen is in some activities, they're pretty straightforward and you'll just do them. Other activities, Brian and I will walk around and just make sure that you understand everything that we've talked about. And incidentally, Brian, if you get any online questions, hop up and let me know. Yeah, just scream, go, whoa, I got one. Okay, cool. Online, where are you? Join us in the now online. All right, so let's get into creation of a project folder. It's pretty straightforward, but the whole purpose is to create a file folder system that you can work on an assignment with. Let me see if I've got a nice folder in here to. Oh, go ahead, Brian, shoot.
How is Maya different from 3D Studio Max?
That's a terrific question. I'm actually really glad somebody asked that. Here's the thing when it comes to 3D. 3D is 3D, and it really doesn't make a difference what the name of the application is. They all work off the same basic principles. If there was one application that was like, this one's fabulous, and all the rest stink, all those other applications would go away, because you know that the business model is if you create something that's inferior, you're out of the game. Does that make sense? So 3D applications use all of the same principles, all of the same ideas. The names of the tools are different. The interface looks a little bit different. And, you know, again, they name stuff and kind of very craftily move verbiage around, but they all work off of the same basic idea. So if you have used any 3D application, other 3D applications are going to make sense to you if you let them. And that's the scary part, because what happens is typically if you know how to use a different 3D application, typically people will try to take one application and turn it into the one they know, because whatever you know is going to seem natural, fluid, and intuitive. And anything different is going to seem dumb and useless and awkward. Well, yeah, because this is what you're used to and this is not. Please, I beg you, don't let that be a crutch for you. You don't want to try to turn Maya into something you already know how to do. Just kind of put it out of your head, realize what you know about 3D is going to help you, but concentrate on what I'm telling you now and apply those ideas, and those lights will start going off. You'll start making those connections, and then you'll understand. Does that make sense? Okay, great. I just want to make sure you guys get that. Now, that being said, in terms of the industry, if you are working on a film, it is like 90% likely you're going to be working with Maya. It is virtually the industry standard. Does that make sense? And the only reason they like one over another is because of the tool use, the workflow, and how easily it fits into most CG production pipelines. Does that make sense? So again, it really depends on the field. Conversely, if you're working on video games, way more than likely you will be using 3D Studio Max. Does that make sense? Good news is, guess what company owns both? Autodesk, that's right. So what they're moving towards is 3D Studio Maya. That's just a name I'm throwing out there. You don't have to use that one, but if you do. But point being, they are trying to bring those two communities together because they are the leaders of this field. Does that make sense? There are other 3D applications out there, absolutely, but they do pretty much the same thing. But what I like about Maya is if you take a look at all the things that Maya does, it is very strong in more categories. If you take a look at 3D Studio Max, it is an amazing modeling application. And then it starts to fall off a little bit when you start getting into animation and rigging, kind of frustrating to work with. Whereas Maya, not the best at one thing, but very, very good at many things. So if you have to learn one application, that's a good one to choose. Does that make sense? So how does Full Sail decide? That's why. Make sense? Awesome. Thank you for playing. Awesome question online. All right. So let's get into the creation of a project folder and how that all goes down. If you have Maya, launch it now. If you don't panic. When you guys get to the lab today, Marcus and Sarah will help you download and install Maya. It was one of the activities for you guys to do. The instructions you need are there. Please do tap into FSO. Incidentally, how many of you guys have combed through FSO already? Okay, make sure you are into FSO. All of the information you need to be successful is there, but you've got to read it. You've got to look it over. They don't pay me by the word or by the activity. Literally, I put it in there because you need it. If I could make FSO more sparse, lighter, with less stuff in there, I would, because believe me, that's less work for me. I put it in there because you need that stuff. So make sure you're looking over FSO, read the stuff that I wrote down for you, watch the stuff that I gave you to watch. It will absolutely make the difference in terms of how well you do in here. Does that make sense? Okay, so one of the activities was download and install Maya. Again, today, not a big deal. You can get away with it not having it today. Just Keep taking notes, keep asking good questions. However, you must have Maya when we come to class together on Friday. Does that make sense? Again, Marcus and Sarah will make sure you're in there getting it, but make sure you've got it for Friday or you will be behind, and it happens quickly. As far as my onliners go, again, make sure you get Maya installed, make sure you get that up and running and functional, and both of you guys, online and local, have access to full sail support, and FSO support's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can't help you with their assignments because they have no idea what I'm teaching you. But can they get Maya on your machine up, running, and functional? Absolutely. So make sure you're tapping into that if you're having trouble. Make sense? Hell yeah?
Hell yeah.
Great. All right, so let's take a look at Maya. And again, we're going to talk about this project creation, and then we're going to talk all about the interface and what's going on there. Now, typically there's a filing cabinet in here for me to work with, but of course today, because I want one, there's not. But let's just say, I'm going to work with this box. All right. Now, this is a filing cabinet. You working with me on that? Okay. The purpose of the filing cabinet is what? Why would I have a filing cabinet? Keeps things organized, right? I have a series of drawers, and in each of those drawers, I have a series of folders. That way, when I'm looking for something, I can find it. Make sense? So I can always flip through the folders. I can open and close drawers, and that helps me find the stuff I need to find quickly because, again, time is money. So in terms of organization in Maya, what you have to realize is every project you work on has a file folder system that you have to be able to access to do the job. It's not like a Word file or an Excel file where you got one document and you're done. There's a lot of stuff going on in a Maya scene, and we need many folders to organize that. And again, the key to organization, it becomes very important when there's more than one person looking for this stuff, right? That's where you really have to write things out clearly, right? It can't be your sloppy handwriting, and you can't use your own sort of private code words for stuff. You have to actually write it out because somebody else is working with it. Does that make sense? Okay. In our world, we are working with Maya. Maya is our partner, our teammate, our significant other from an arranged marriage. So the way this works is we are the artists, right? We understand creativity. We like to make really cool looking stuff. Maya is the total opposite of that. So in terms of our life, it is, you know, like the odd couple brought together to work on something. So when it comes to getting things done, Maya is very precise. Maya is very demanding. Maya has zero flexibility, but we have to work with this person. Does that make sense? So what we have to do is make sure we create these file folder systems, and we're both using these file folder systems. They have to be clearly named and organized. And the most important thing is we have to let each other know, well, what are we working on? I'm working on this. Because very seldom are you working on one thing at a time. There's often many things you're working on. Does that make sense? And again, your partner is a machine. It only understands ones and zeros, and it is ridiculous. Does that make sense? But this is our partner. The good news is, though, once you understand how Maya works, and once you understand how these things come together, Maya will do anything you want. Absolutely boundless creativity. And that's awesome. But you just got to learn how to make it work. It's a tough relationship, but it's worth it. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's get into the file folder creation and our new significant other, Maya. All right, now in terms of file folder creation, it's pretty straightforward. We do have an activity for it, so there's a file that you can use, but it's really just an empty file. But what I want to get you guys into the habit of is a process which we call setting the project. Setting the project is the process where we let Maya know this is what I want to work on so that Maya can find the files that Maya needs and I can find the files that I need. So since I want to work on a project, and this one does have a file, I'm going to go to File in my main menu items and click it with the left mouse button. And I'm going to scroll down here to Set Project. And again, this is how I let Maya know what I'm working on right now. And every time I launch Maya, the very first thing I do is set my project to whatever it is I'm working on. In this case, we're going to do an activity. So I want to set my project to my activity file folder. This was another thing that was on your FSO. Download the activity file folder so that we can actually do these activities. So again, make sure you've downloaded this. It's not going to kill you today, but you've got to have that file folder ready to go, and you need to know where it is when we get together on Friday. So File, Set Project. And then Maya says, okay, well, what folder do you want to work on? So I'm going to navigate to my hard drive, and in my recommendations on FSO, I suggested you make a file folder called 3DF _ and the year and the month you took the class. It is the year 2017, so it would be 17, and it is June, which is the 6th month, so it would be 1706 would be the name of it. So mine is just a general year and month, and I hit Set in the lower right-hand corner with my left mouse button. Yes?
You also told us to download an actual folder called activity files.
Yes.
You don't want us to set it to activity files. You want us to set it to the folder that we put the activity files.
That's a terrific question. I want you to set it to the activity file folder because it's specifically, I need to tell Maya, this is what we're working on. Because the problem you run into is if you go to File, Set Project, and you choose just that outer folder, I could be working on activities, I could be working on assets, I could be working on skill checks. Maya has no idea. And Maya has, you know, like you and I might make a logical deduction. Okay, I'm working on an activity. I'm probably looking for activity. Maya will not make that leap. Very ones and zeros. As you know, computers are yes, no. Everything they do, their logic is all yes, no. So
once in the activity file folder where it's done,
all you have to do is select the outer folder, activity files, and hit Set. That's it. And then now the project is set. Does that make sense? All right. Now we go to File, and then Open Scene. And again, because I've set my project and I let Maya know what I want to work on, it immediately goes to my activity folder. And you can see the path here. In my 3DF folder, in my activity folder, it went to the Scenes folder specifically, because that's where Maya files are kept. And it says, well, which one of these do you want? Does that make sense? Because we're organized. We're on the same page now. Maya knows what I want to do. So now I can go to my particular file, whichever one I'm looking for. And in this instance, I am looking for my, what did I call it? Oh, project folder activity. I select it, and then I hit Open. Yes?
did you, when you first started this,
Yeah.
open scene or?
File, Open Scene. That's correct. Yeah, no, always double check if you're not sure. File, Open Scene. And again, now I select the project file folder, activity, and hit Open, lower right-hand corner. And I don't need to save this. There's nothing going on here. All right, now, so here I am in an empty file. Again, in this instance, setting your project, not a big deal. I just want you to start getting into that habit. So now I've got this empty scene here, and I'm going to create the file folder system for Maya. So the way you do that is, again, you're going to go to File in your main menu items, and you'll come down to Project Window, which is directly above Set Project. And this is how we create a project. So let's say I decide, hey, you know what, I want to build this cool robot. Okay, the first phase is I need to make a file folder system for Maya to follow, as well as myself. And then I'm going to set my project to that file folder system so I can build that thing. Does that make sense? All right, so again, we go to Project Window. When I click that with the left mouse button, it opens this fun little window here. And what I'm going to do is, if you look over here towards the top on the right-hand side, it says New. I want to make a new project, something to work on, this cool robot I want to build. So I click the word New with my left mouse button. All right, so what's the name of my new project? I'm going to highlight the field, and I'm going to call it Cool Robot. You'll notice that I put the words together, and I made the word, the letter R capital for the second word in Cool Robot. I could also, if I wanted to, Cool _ Robot. Also perfectly acceptable. What you want to avoid are spaces. Spaces are non-characters. The computer doesn't understand a non-character. You got to give it something. Does that make sense? It can cause problems. So just underscore, capitalize the second word. There are different things that you can use. Make sense? Okay. So cool robot. Now, the next thing it's going to ask me is, well, where do you want this folder to be created? Because I can tell it where to make this thing. Where should I put it? Currently, it's trying to put it in my 3DF folder, which is fine. But I want to put it on my desktop just so I can show you very easily what the folder looks like and where it goes. So what I'm going to do is come all the way to the right, and you'll see that there's a little yellow folder there. Anytime in Maya that you see a little yellow folder, that's Maya telling you, navigate me to where this thing is. Show me. Bring me there, because I want to know. So what I do is I click that yellow folder, and Maya says, show me the path. Where do you want this? And I would like it on my desktop. So I just select desktop. Make sense? Okay. And then I hit select with my left mouse button. So now it's going to be called Cool Robot. It's going to be on my desktop. You can see its path right here. And you'll see there's a whole bunch of folders in here. These are the default folders in a project. Maya needs all of them, as do you. So you leave those at their defaults, and you just hit accept. So now, if you look over here on your desktop, I have this folder called Cool Robot, and when I open it up, there's a whole bunch of fun little folders in there, including the little workspace file. And that's basically what builds the workspace that you work on. The actual files will be saved and kept in the scenes folder. That's the folder you're going to be going into the most. Does that make sense? That's where your Maya files are. We will also be utilizing the source images folder a great deal, also in some instances the images folder. But they all have very specific jobs. Some folders I need, some folders Maya needs. But ultimately, I need them all to do the job. Make sense? Oh, and online has a question. Go, Brian.
Well, if I'm going to back this stuff up, because I should back my stuff up.
All the time.
A lot of hours of my life doing it.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to back it up. What should I back up? Scenes or?
Honestly, I would back up the entire folder.
The project folder.
Absolutely, because the issue you run into is, again, some of these file folders you don't go into ever because you don't need it. But what you don't realize is behind the scenes, Maya is working on stuff, and it's saving information, and oftentimes it's to your advantage. And Maya will take that stuff and put that in those other folders when you set your project, so it knows where to put them. And then you don't want to not have that information because you're basically taking away some of Maya's abilities and notes and shortcuts. Does that make sense? So if you're going to back up a file, I would back up the whole project folder. Could you get away with less? Yeah, maybe. Most of the time, not worth it. Does that make sense? Terrific question, Brian. All right. So now that I've created this project, now let's say I want to build this project. I'm really excited. I want to get started. What was the thing I told you, the first thing you have to do? Set the project. Number one, I got to tell Maya, I want to work on Cool Robot right now. So who can tell me how to do that? Because I totally forgot. Go ahead. Don't be shy. That's right. File, set project. Left mouse button click. I go to my desktop. I find my Cool Robot file folder. And I only have to select the outermost folder because everything else is within that. The scenes folder, the source images folder, that's a self-contained entity. So I can just hit set to that folder, and now I'm ready to rock and roll. Make sense? Okay. And again, the benefit here is whatever I build, when I decide to save it, it's going to go to my scenes folder, the same place. How many of you have ever been super frustrated when you can't find a file you saved? Right? Does that not drive you mad? Oh. So when you set your project, you know where that stuff is going. Make sense? Simple thing, huge difference. Yes?
Dumb question.
There is no such thing.
It's going to go to the scenes folder in the Cool Robot folder.
That's correct.
Not the scenes folder in the activity file.
That's correct, because I set my project. However, had I set my project or I'd left it at activities, that's where all my files would be going. Yeah. Or to a random default folder. Does that make sense?
And then it has to populate all those files in a random default folder.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is why it is utterly chaotic, and that's why I set the project is so huge, and you will see how big it is as we go. Another question in the back? Or are you stretching? Okay. If you look at your activities on FSO, there's 10 of them right out of the box. Actually, there's truly 11 because one of them is 1.5. But in terms of the activities, they are all there in the module called Let's Get Started. You open up that module, everything is in there. And again, it tells you, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And you literally have to do those things. It's not even a maybe. Get in there and get them done. Does that make sense? Okay. And in terms of the class, again, when you get to lab, Marcus and Sarah can help you guys if you're not really sure what's going on. Totally fine. Also, Brian will be holding online help hours right after class, so you can pop in there and ask him on the internet whatever it is you want to know. Does that make sense? The help is there. You can't be shy. It'd be great if we had like a really long time to get to know each other and talk about what makes us feel fuzzy inside. But unfortunately, we've only got a month before this class is over. And let me tell you, a month goes fast. So we kind of have to, it's more like speed dating. We got to get to know each other pretty quickly because, I want to help you and you want my help. So we need to kind of get over the shy part fairly quickly to make best use of the available help, because you can fall behind quickly and you don't want to get into a situation where you're like, oh, I'll catch up. Probably not. You need to be on board as we go. Make sense? Hell yeah?
Hell yeah.
Awesome. Good. Yeah, go ahead.
So whenever we have a project that we use that everything we do is move forward, whatever.
In terms of the Maya files, yes, absolutely. And that's why it's so important to set your project. When you're looking for your Maya files, that's where you're going to go. Think of the Maya file as like the house. There's a bunch of other folders in there, and that's like the other furniture. If you get by without a couch or a bed, yeah, short term, you can probably make it with stuff, but you need the house. Does that make sense? The Maya file is the house. The structure, all the framework, it's built off of that. They need that other stuff, too.
That's generally the Maya stuff.
Most of the information, absolutely. Most of the ones and zeros that Maya does math with, that's where it is. But, cool textures, rendering information, lighting information, shortcuts that Maya makes for itself, that stuff is in those other folders. And that's why you need those too. And again, it's like, can I have a house without rugs? Yeah, but rugs are nice. So it makes my job easier of living. Make sense?
Yeah.
Good question. All righty. So we've gone into creation of a project folder so we can create stuff if we need to. We've talked about the importance of setting the project. Again, critically important. It seems silly. They're so easy. Trust me. Your life is really rough if you don't do those things. So I'm glad that we're on the same page with that. All right. So let's get into some more stuff on playing mit Maya. All right, we're going to talk about the interface. Now, I know I talked about this before and kind of described the fact that the Maya interface can be intimidating when you look at it as a whole, but it's not really that bad when you break it down into parts. And what I'm going to do for you guys is we're going to talk about the parts, a little bit about what it does and how it works. And again, there's no way I can go into everything. It's not possible. But kind of like when you're learning a new language, we start with the really important stuff. Where's the bathroom? How much for beer? The things that are really, really important. We get to those first, and then we get into the periphery stuff as we go. Make sense? All right, let's talk about Maya's interface. All righty. In terms of Maya's interface, there's a lot going on in here, but it's not that bad. Let me tuck this in a little bit. All right. Across the top, we have the main menu items. And these main menu items basically house tools and actions. An example of a tool from our world would be like a screwdriver, a hammer, a saw. An action would be cut this in half, glue these together, make a hole in that thing. Does that make sense? And that's where that stuff is all housed. And to access any of them, all you have to do is go to the menu item, click with the left mouse button, and you get a little drop-down menu. the drop-down menu gives you all the tools and actions you need. And you'll see that there's a cute little picture to one side, and we'll talk more about that. And in some instances, in most of them actually, you'll see that there's a little box to the right of that tool or action. This is the options box. Options change the way tools and actions work. For example, in our world, hammers drive nails in as well as pull them out. It depends on how you're holding the hammer that determines what it does. Does that make sense? That's an option. So in terms of these tools and actions, we want to go to this box to figure out how do I change the options to change the output of what I'm doing. So that's what these things are. Now, these options in terms of main menu items can be altered by adjusting the status line. Now, the status line or the menu set basically tells Maya what kind of job you want to do, because Maya does many, many jobs. Let's say, for example, let's pretend Maya builds houses, right? Now, in terms of building a house, do you use the same tools for shingling as you do for interior painting? No, not at all, right? It's the difference between hammers and nails versus paint, drop cloth, and dustpan, right? So in terms of what you need, totally different tool sets. Maya does many jobs on the CG production pipeline. So what you want to do is make sure you're telling Maya what job you're doing so that it gives you the tools you need, because otherwise there'd be tools everywhere and they're disorganized. So the status line tells Maya, what do you want to do? So for example, if I want to animate, I switch it to animation, I have different tools to choose from. So if you don't recognize the tools you're looking for, check your status line because you may be on the wrong thing. Make sense? We are a polygon modeling class. You want to make sure you're set for modeling, and that's going to give you the menu items that I talk about the most. Make sense? Oh yeah? Okay, great. Status line. Next thing I want to talk about down here are the shelf tabs and shelf buttons. Now, what's interesting about these shelf tabs is many of these tabs have names that are similar to the status line. And that's because those shelf tabs do represent shortcuts to some of these items. So for example, in my polygon tab, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of buttons here. And what these buttons are shortcuts to main menu items. So instead of going to Edit Mesh and then go to Extrude, I could also come to this button right here, one click instead of two. Does that make sense? These buttons are shortcuts. Now it's true, the name isn't on the button, which is kind of tricky, but again, if you take a look up here, under your menu set, there is a picture as a guide over here, and to be honest with you, once you've used a button a couple times, you remember that's the one that does what you want. However, initially, if you hover your cursor over a menu item or a button, a little yellow window pops up. You see that? It tells you what that thing is called, and it tells you a little bit about what it does. Those are the help balloons. Make sense? Okay. Now, the other thing that's really cool is when you hover your cursor over something, if you look into the lower left-hand corner here, this is called Maya's help line. And you will see Maya also tells you what thing are you hovering over, and it will tell you a little bit about what it is. Does that make sense? The reason that is helpful is because Maya actually comes with its own help documents that explain things better if you need more information. So let's say, for example, I'm hovering over the button that's for the extrude tool. It says extrude the selected component, and that might as well be Greek, because I haven't the slightest idea what that is. But I know it's called the extrude tool. Make sense? So here's where I can launch Maya's help documents. As long as you have an internet connection, if you look at your keyboard right now, you'll see in the lower left-hand corner, FN, that's the function key. If you hold that down and press F1, which is at the top left side of your keyboard, it's one of your lighting adjusters in terms of brightness of your screen. If you hold down FN and press F1, you launch Maya's help documents. What's that? No F1? No worries, you got it. Now, I had a feeling that FN would still be on there, but no worries. If you have a concern, voice it. All righty. Now, what works terrific? You guys all right?
Perfect.
Awesome. No worries. Again, what seems simple, you can see how quickly you can, whoa, what's going on, right? That's why we do it together. Brian, go.
I have a question. What if you're using a PC?
There are help documents. I have to look into what the code is for it. But what I would say is, let's say there's a tool that I want to know how it works. Let's say, for example, the extrude tool. If I go to edit mesh and I go to the extrude tool, if I go to the options box on the tool, in many instances, there's a help button. And if I press that, it will not only launch Maya's help documents, but it will launch the help documents specifically for that tool. Does that make sense? And again, what I was going to show you is the fact that you can look up a tool by clicking the magnifying glass, but here we are already in the extrude options. And again, there's little pictures and text that talk you through how the tool works and what adjustments you can do to it to make it work. Does that make sense? So if your notes are failing you for whatever reason, and it's not a time when there's help available online, which I can't imagine, but let's just pretend, then you can access Maya's help documents, and that's one more place you can go for help. Does that make sense? So very useful tool for you, the help documents. All right. So again, the helpline will tell you what things are. Let's start talking about this area here. And incidentally, what I typically try to do with my shelf tabs is I try to match my shelf tab to whatever thing I'm doing. Once those agree, I see the things that I need. Does that make sense? Okay. So this area over here is called the toolbox. The toolbox is basically how you interact with Maya. It is you as an artist actually doing work with Maya. And the toolbox allows you to move things around. It allows you to rotate things and see them from different angles. It allows you to scale them to make them larger or smaller. So it's basically how you interact with your art. Does that make sense? Until they make like VR goggles and we just put these gloves on and we can do everything like that. And we're headed that way. Not yet though. So in terms of Maya, how do we get in there and mess with things? These are the tools of the toolbox. There are many of them in there. I'm just going to get into the big ticket item. This is the select tool, and it literally allows you to select things. So for example, if I want to select this sphere, I make sure I have the select tool in my hand, and I can then grab it. And literally, it's just like you grabbing onto something. Because sometimes you want to use a tool on an object, you know, hammer it. Sometimes you just want to hold it. Does that make sense? So select tool is just for holding things. Now, in terms of the select tool, when you select something, it lights up green. I am dealing with this object right now. What you will notice is when I select an object, this area here suddenly fills with information. If nothing is selected, this area is empty. This area is called the channel box. The channel box gives me information about the selected object. The icon for the channel box is this one on the far right on the top. So if I select an object, I know what the object is named. I know where it is in space, and the inputs for that object are available to me in terms of how it's built and any history associated with the object. Does that make sense? Selection. Not selected. Nothing in here. Make sense? Okay. Next tool down I want to talk about, the move tool. The move tool, as its name implies, it allows me to move an object. So if I select the move tool and select an object, now I can actually move that object. Now what you will notice when you look at an object that the move tool has been activated, and incidentally in terms of the size of the manipulator, the arrows that you see, if you use your plus and your minus keys, you can make those things bigger or smaller to your own preference. So feel free to adjust those. What you will notice when I grab this object is that it's got these arrows. And these arrows correspond to axes of movement. Green is the y-axis. Green is up and down. Positive y is up, above the grid. Negative y is down below the grid. I also have the blue axis, z, or depth, front to back. Positive z, this direction, where the arrow is pointing. Negative z, the other direction. I also have side to side, which is the x-axis, or red. Red is always x, blue is always z, and green is always y. The color coordination helps you figure that out. Make sense? Okay, so if I want to move this sphere up in the air, I can literally grab the arrow with my left mouse button, hold it down, and pull upwards. And you'll notice that the sphere goes up. What's interesting is I can move my mouse left and right, but it's not going to move left and right. It's only going to go up and down because I have the y-axis selected. Similarly, you'll notice that as I move this object, what's happening over here? The numbers are changing, the values, okay? So I'm moving this object, and Maya is measuring the movement. The unit of measurement Maya is using is called grid units. It's an arbitrary value, like inches or feet. This little square on my grid is a grid unit. So I can move this object in grid units. Now you might be wondering, can I plug in a number there? Absolutely. If I wanted to, I could say, you know what? I want this object to be 5 grid units in the air. So I could just click on that field, type in a 5 and hit enter. It is now 5 grid units in Y. Does that make sense? Now, any smarties out there, if I plug in a 0 and hit enter, where's it going to go? Any thoughts? To the center, right? To the origin. Maya is a giant Cartesian grid coordinate system. So 0 is the origin, the middle. Make sense? Okay. So I can move in Z, I can move in X, I can move in Y. And again, if I wanted to, I can plug in values for X, Y, and Z of 0, which will bring me right back to the origin. Make sense? Hell yeah? Awesome. Go ahead. In terms of the way it is currently set up, yes. Can I change where the starting point is? Yes, I can. We'll talk more about that when we get into lecture 4. But at this stage, 0 is right where you're looking at it, the origin. Good question, though. Now, you might think, well, it's kind of tedious to like grab these arrows and try to move this thing around. You know, it's kind of robotic. Is there a faster way to move things? And the answer is yes, absolutely. If you grab the arrows in the middle where they all meet with the left mouse button, you can move the object very quickly in a much more organic or fluid nature. But what's happening in the channel box? Can you guys see the numbers? What's going on in there when I move like this? I'm getting really small numbers in some instances. All 3 values are changing. That's the big ticket item. Because what's happening is Maya represents 3D space, depth, right? You and I know we're looking at a flat screen though, right? I can't reach in there. So when I'm grabbing this thing in the middle and I'm moving it, Maya is trying to make a guess as to how far back or forward I'm moving things. Maya is a miserable guesser. Does that make sense? So typically what we do when we're trying to move an object around is we will grab it in the middle, move it ballpark where we want it to go, and then we will use these arrows for precision. Does that make sense? That way they both work together. Yes?
The actual like canvas, like just the grid itself.
Yes.
How do we like manipulate it?
Oh, we're going to get into that. Yep, we're going to get into that, I promise. The question was, how do I move around in Maya? And we're going to talk about that next, but I do the toolbox first. But yes, we do need to talk about that. Again, all zeros will bring me to the origin. Now, I'm going to move now to the rotate tool. Do you notice any parallels between the rotate tool and the scale tool? Anything similar? It rotates, basically. That's what the tool does. As its name implies, it's the rotate tool. Do you notice anything colory about it? What do we got? It's color-coded. I didn't even have to do the funny voice. Yes, it's color-coded, right? I've got a blue axis to rotate on. Guess what that is? What's blue? Blue is Z, right? So I can rotate the object. Here, you know what? Let me do this. I'm going to make a cube because it's way easier to see. On the blue axis, I'm rotating in Z, and you'll see the rotate Z value. Does that make sense? What's red? X-axis, rotate on X, right? Green, Y, rotate on the Y-axis. So could I plug in values? Absolutely. What do those numbers represent? Degrees. 45 degrees of rotation, 180 degrees of rotation, so you could literally plug those values in. Does that make sense? Just be, again, cognizant of X, Y, and Z. What color am I changing? Make sense? Okay. Last one is scale. Notice any similarities between this tool? Anything colory going on there?
The X, Z, and Y axis.
X, Y, and Z, absolutely. Again, red for X, blue for Z, and Y for green. Yay, good, Brian got it. Oh, and a question. Go ahead.
Is it possible to change the colors of the axis? This person cannot see, use green and red.
Absolutely. To be honest with you, Maya is completely customizable, and that's one of the cool things about it, because I could literally make the entire interface hot pink if I want. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. But you could make the entire thing hot pink if you really, really wanted to. Please don't do that. But in terms of what you want to do, not something I've done in a long time, but let me see. Windows, settings and preferences, color settings. And if you go into your color settings, you can come in here and find the category for what you're looking for and change those color values to whatever you want to switch it to. Yes, be very, very careful. It's like handing a lightsaber to a 5-year-old. Dangerous. But point being, can you change that stuff? Absolutely. Many things in Maya can be changed. Many. All righty. So in terms of the scale tool works similar to the other ones in that it's axis specific. You'll note that when I scale in Y, the object scales both positively and negatively at the same time. Is there a way to do just one? Absolutely. Not yet. All right. I can scale in X positively and negatively at the same time. I can scale in Z positively and negatively at the same time. But what you'll notice is I'm distorting the object when I do that. What if I want the object to stay in the proportions it's in, but I want it to get bigger or smaller? The middle one, absolutely. We figured out that that's what that typically does. So if I get to the middle, left mouse button, drag my mouse, I can make the object bigger or smaller, and it doesn't change its proportions. Now you'll notice when I first create an object, its scale is 1. All ones, 1/1 scale for its actual size. If I want to make this cube 3 times bigger, I can literally come in here and highlight scale for all 3, plug in a 3, and hit enter. Now my cube is 3 times larger than it was previously. Does that make sense? But you got to do X, Y, and Z. Well, here's what you have to understand about Maya in terms of measurement. It's basically set up on grid units for its base scale. But this scale is as big as I say it is. If I want to say 1 grid unit is a mile, 1 grid unit is a mile, and that is the biggest cube ever. Does that make sense? I could also say 1 grid unit is a millimeter. It's an arbitrary value. I decide that. The scale, everyone would use the same. Does that make sense? So that if you build a building and I build a building and we're using the same scale, they're going to go together. You don't have to change anything in Maya. Nope. We just have a mutually understood scale that we're working off of because we're a team.
No dot fringe, no pixel fringe.
We don't have to worry about that. because it's all fluid. I tell you what it is, you know what I mean? Or I tell Maya what it is. I don't have to, oh no, you know, I decide. If I want a big picture, it's going to be huge. Yes?
What is the difference between using the select tool and then using the tool itself to select? I noticed that if you have one of the tools selected, if you click on another object, it'll select that with that tool.
That's a good question. What's the difference between using the select tool on something and just using, like, say, the move tool and choose move and then select an object? Well, here's the thing. Let's say, for example, I have the scale tool selected and I grab this object. And let's say I want to move it or something.
Yeah, you didn't notice that you're still on that tool.
Exactly. Therein lies the problem. But with my select tool, and in some instances you're just selecting things. Not as big a deal when you're dealing with whole objects, but when we start getting into components, which we'll talk about lecture 3, that's where it becomes a big deal. Am I selecting or am I moving? Does that make sense? So that's where that distinction really becomes a big deal. But that's a great question. All right, so these are the tools of the toolbox. They allow me to work with the objects I'm working on. But let's take a look. You'll notice that this is, we call this Gesundheit, the workspace or the work panel or the panel view. And what you'll notice is this is basically our canvas. This is our art that we're working on. A couple of big ticket items. You'll notice that it's got its own little menu set, the panel menu. And there's fun stuff up here for us to mess with. For example, like the show menu, which allows us to hide and show things as we wish. But just be aware, there is a menu in your panel. Now, this particular window or panel is called the perspective view. And you notice that because it says persp at the bottom, meaning perspective. This is a window with depth, okay? And that's why this looks like a 3D object when I look at it. In terms of navigation within Maya, there's 3 button combinations that you can use to drive around inside the workspace. Now, what you want to do is if you look at your keyboard right now, you'll see that there's a option key on there. If you hold down the option key and hold down the left mouse button on your mouse, you now have the ability to tumble. Tumble allows you to see an object from any side. Again, as long as you hold down the option key and the left mouse button, you can tumble the object. And incidentally, the first time I took Maya for a spin, I think I got a little nauseous, so don't be upset if that happens. You'll get used to it. But again, option left mouse button, tumble function. Option and middle mouse button held down, track or dolly. And what this allows us to do is move alongside the object. I can move up, I can move down, I can move side to side, but I'm not getting any closer to the object. I'm just moving alongside it. Option and middle mouse button held down. Yes, no, I'm working from a mouse. If you've got a tablet, I'm not sure which button that is on your pen because it depends on how you've configured it. But what I would say is if you hold down option and one of the buttons and you get that little cursor that looks like a bunch of arrows that meet in the middle, that's the track or dolly. Does that make sense? Let me know what that one is. But that's track or dolly. I'm moving alongside the object. Okay? Now, option and right mouse button held down, which gives you that weird looking shape arrow, that's the zoom. Zoom in, zoom out. Again, hold the option, hold the right mouse button. Make sense? Zooming in and zooming out. Now, it is true that if you roll the scroll wheel, if your mouse has a scroll wheel, that will also zoom in and out. But what you will notice about that is it's working the tendons across the top of your forearm excessively. That will hurt in not very much time. So you don't want to do that. Avoid that one. Again, option with right mouse button, your better bet on the zooming. As we have told you guys, you can configure your tablet and your pen to be a 3-button mouse. That is totally acceptable. In fact, that's a little bit more ergonomically sound in terms of the health of your arm, better for you. I've been using a mouse so long, it is really hard for me to use a pen tablet. I can use the pen when I'm texturing. In fact, I love using the pen when I'm texturing. I just can't operate Maya with it. So I use the pen. And incidentally, if you're wondering, can you pass this class without buying a mouse? The answer is no. You cannot use the trackpad in Maya. That is awful. So please don't do that to yourself. Please, please, please. Either use your pen tablet, the pen with your tablet, or use your mouse. But get a mouse. Get a mouse. 3 buttons, doesn't have to be fancy. You can get them for $10 at the grocery store. They're right next to the candy bars. So get a mouse. All right, so we've talked about Track and Dolly, we've talked about Zoom, and we've talked about Tumble. Now here's where we got to talk about there are other windows in Maya. What? Yes, don't act now. There's 3 more. If you come over here, these are our saved layouts, and there are many different layouts. If you click this icon here, the second one down, you launch what we call 4View. 4View is basically what its name implies. You are looking at one object from 4 different perspectives, if you'll excuse that word. However, these views are what we call orthographic views. Orthographic means it has no depth. And that's why it looks like a cube here, but it looks like a square in all these other windows. So to give you an idea of what's going on here, I'm going to move this cube, and you'll see I'm looking at the same thing in all 4 views. Make sense? Now, the cool thing about all these great views is they help you line stuff up. That's why we have 4 views: top, front, side. Because what we're going to do is we're going to line up an object, and then let's say I want to put a sphere on top of that. I can make a sphere, and then I could take that sphere and I could sort of try to eyeball it and line it up in perspective. But if I come over here, I can see, oh, no, I'm definitely not in the middle. Let me line that thing up here. And looks good here, but this one is off. So I can move it here. Looks good here, looks good here. I know I'm all set out there. Does that make sense? These windows work together to help us align things. Now, I know you're thinking, wow, that doesn't look like any fun at all. Why do I have all my windows open at one time? They're so tiny. It's like working on my phone. Well, the good news is you can jump from window to window. If you put your cursor over any window and hit your space bar, you're in that window. If you hit space bar, you go back out to 4View, put your cursor over a different window, hit space bar, now you're in that view. Does that make sense? Simple as that. What window do you want to be in? You pick it. Make sense? Okay. So again, those are saved layouts. And there's a bunch of different layouts in there, different configurations of windows and so forth, depending on your needs. All right. Now, this area down here is called the timeline. We're not really going to get into that one here because that's basically animation. But just so that you understand how it works, how many of you guys are familiar with flipbooks? Okay, good. A good number of you. There's a drawing on a series of images, and basically what happens is the image is a little bit different in each one, and as long as you flip through them at the right rate of speed, we get the illusion of motion due to a phenomenon called persistence of vision. Well, this works the same way, but instead of a bunch of different pages, what we have are a bunch of different stops on this timeline, and each stop is a drawing. So if you've got 24 drawings, you've got 1 second of animation. Does that make sense? 24 frames per second. So that's what this timeline is. And basically this area over here is our controls, and it works kind of like a DVD player. Play your animation forward, stop, play your animation backwards, stop, go to the beginning, go to the end. Does that make sense? Just allows you to jump around. Now, we've already talked about this area here. What's this one called? Channel box, right? Information about the selected object, in this instance, P-Sphere 1. And the icon for the channel box is right up there in the corner, teeny tiny. All right? And then this area down here, this is called Maya's layer editor. Now, how many of you guys have used Photoshop before? Any Photoshoppers? Oh, good. All right. Photoshop is layers. Layers is Photoshop. There are layers in Maya too. It's nowhere near as cool and powerful, but it gives you the ability to organize things in terms of putting things on different layers so you can hide them, show them, template them, lock them. Does that make sense? The same ideas of how you can speed your workflow and organize things. So it does all of that, and that's what those layers are for. All right. Any questions? I know we talked about a lot. Any questions about the interface so far? You guys had some good ones. I like what I hear. No? Seriously? I couldn't have explained it that well. Come on. Really? Oh, Brian, you're just saying that because we work together. But I like it. Keep it up. Okay. All right. Let's now do an activity. I bet you guys would love to do an activity. Would you like that? All right. We are going to do an activity called navigation and manipulation. This is an activity where we're going to actually get into Maya and we're going to move things around so you can get used to using your windows a little bit and get used to using the tools in the toolbox a little bit, because we got to figure that stuff out if we're going to make stuff. So in terms of the fact that we are talking about an activity, what's the first thing I need to do? Set my project. I can see you're going to get this right. Set the project is the first thing. But where do I set it? Who can tell me where I set my project? Except Brian. Brian knows. What's that? The activity files, absolutely, because it's an activity. So without further ado, I'm going to go back to Maya and tell Maya, Maya, I want to work on my activity. Because what did I set it for last time? Anybody? For Cool Robot, right? So that's what Maya thinks I'm working on right now. So if I start opening files, it's going to go to Cool Robot and go, well, what do you want? No, I want an activity. So I have to set my project. So let's get Maya up and running. And then I'm going to go to File, Set Project. I'm going to navigate to my activity file folder and hit Set. And now Maya is ready to get me what I want. So if I go to File, Open Scene, you will see I have the Toolbox activity. That's the one we want. And we hit Open. Boop. And what you will see is something that probably reminds you of your childhood a little bit. I have a couple of objects in here with fun colors on them. And what I want you to do is create simple primitives in Maya and move them into position and match them just like you see over here. Now here's the very important piece of this puzzle you need to know. In terms of the creation of these objects, it's true you can click on these buttons here to make the objects. But there's two different ways to make objects. You can either interactively create them or they just magically appear. I have mine set for magically appear, not interactive creation. So you have to choose which way you want to do it, because either is fine. My personal preference is magic. In terms of the creation of polygon primitives, and that's what these things are, if you go to Create Polygon Primitives, you will notice down here at the bottom, interactive creation on mine is not checked on. And what that means is, if I have that turned on, and I'm going to click it so that it is on, you see it's checked on there. When I create a cube, it says, okay, draw on the grid. So I drag with my left mouse button to make a shape and then let go. And then it says, now go up. So I grab the button again and go up and let go. And then now I have my shape. Does that make sense? I'm not really crazy about that. So what I typically do is I go to Create Polygon Primitives and uncheck that. And what I like about that is if I click on Sphere, I got a sphere. Done. I don't have to draw it, shape it, figure it out, because I'm going to change the shape of it anyway. Does that make sense? Very seldom do you have the shape you need from go. In this instance, you do. But does that make sense? Okay. So point being, every shape you need, if you uncheck that interactive creation, you will be able to do this. Make sense? So what we're going to do is Brian and I are going to walk around a little bit and see how you guys are doing and watch you try to match. Again, don't feel bad if you don't have Maya today. Today's the day you don't have to do it, but you can see why it's critically important already, right? Okay, so make sure you got it installed and ready to go. Brian and I will walk around and see how you guys are doing. Hopefully online is having a good time too. Yeah. Yeah.
We just have to recreate this, which is all
Yep,
gray.
just what you see there. You don't have to color it though. Yours will be all gray.
I mean, I have Maya.
Yep, you've got to go in there and go to, in terms of your activity file, if you scroll down, it says download activity file. It shouldn't be locked. Oh, because you didn't do any of the other things. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, you got to read, take a look at the syllabus page. Yeah, they're all linked, so you have to go through them in chronological order. What's that? Mm-hmm. And then go to File, Open Scene. Let me see you do that again. Let me just see. Scooch over just a tiny bit. All right. Set your project to your activity file folder. File, set project. Wait, no, No, that's Cool Robot. There's nothing in there. You want to choose your activity file folder. Did you download it from Maya? From FSL? Yeah, activity file. That's the one you want. Set the project. There you go. Now go to File, Open Scene, and it should be there. Yep. There you go. You're good, you're good. It's all about setting the project. It seems so simple, but it makes a big difference. Good job. Nope, the activity folder is a separate folder that you downloaded from FSL. Yeah, Cool Robot was one that we made just so that you could see how that happened. How do you create a project? So what you want to do is set your project to your activity file folder, wherever that is on your computer. And if you download it from the FSO, it's probably in Documents.
Okay, I mean, these were the contents of the activity. I just took it out.
No, those are the contents to Cool Robot. That has nothing to do with the activity files. Does that make sense? That's a totally separate project. What's that? This is called Toolbox Activity. And they're alphabetical, so Toolbox will be towards the bottom.
I don't have to install yet for this time.
Yeah, it's okay. Nope, you're doing fine. But you will need a 3-button mouse. Those will be frustrating to work with. But that's okay. Today's the first day. I want you to come into problems so you realize, okay, Steve's not making it up. I need that. Yeah. You have to do them in chronological order. You must go through each one of them. That is correct. Yep, no worries. Hold down your right mouse button over it. Choose object mode. Almost. Try it again. Good. Now you can select it. Good job. All righty. For those of you who have Maya, it looks like most of you are doing pretty well. Looks good. Alrighty. You made it. Fabulous. Fabulous. How you guys doing? Okay, good.
Like when you're like rotating and stuff, it snaps.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
Like normally it's like hold shift and it'll like snap.
Well, there's a bunch of different sort of snapping functions, and I see you pressed S already, trying to get that to happen. You can use these up here. We haven't gotten into any of those yet. Also, within the options of a tool, you can tell it to snap in like 5% increments or that kind of thing. But at this stage, I just want to see you moving stuff around. It doesn't have to be perfect. Perfect is tomorrow. How you guys doing? Good? Awesome. And incidentally, for those of you who are just starting to delve into FSO, all of those activities are in chronological order. You must go through them and complete them in order to access those activities. So you can't skip down and do like number 5 activity. You got to go through 1 through 4 first, and then you can have at 5. For those of you who noticed, the pyramid is a 180-degree flip, completely upside down. So if you wanted to make it perfect, you could, well, I don't like to use that word, but 180 degrees, it'll turn it right over. Absolutely. If you double-click on a tool, it will open up the options of the tool, and you could literally choose to snap things on increments like 5% turns or 5-degree turns, that kind of thing. Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah, looks terrific. You got it. Cool, cool. All right, looks like you guys are doing pretty well. I know it's tough to break away from the activities because those are super fun, but we got to keep talking about some more stuff. So I'm going to move back into talking about more fun things for you to do. All right. Oh, incidentally, big ticket item. The Z key is your undo. So if you do something that you're like, oh no, how do I stop that, or how do I make time go backwards? Z is undo, and Maya will remember many undos. In fact, as an option, you can set Maya to undo infinitely, and it will remember everything, and you can completely undo everything. So Z is your buddy, and Shift Z will actually take you back forward in time again. So if you go back too many times and you want to go forward one, Shift Z will send you the other way, which is really cool. All right, let's talk about modeling. Now, in terms of modeling, there are many phases that your models will go through. And for our class, we start with the designing or gathering of reference information, the images we're using, but we do that for you, so you don't have to worry about that. Then we get into the blockout or primitive build phase of the object, and that's where we're basically trying to occupy the shape and form of the object in question using simple primitives. We build it in logical parts. Again, we're going to talk more about that process as we go. And then we UV map in order to prepare the geometry for the texturing phase. And that's where we can make wood look like wood and brushed metal look like brushed metal. And we move through this entire pipeline, finishing up with cleanup and organization. And again, that's so we can pass it on to the next person in our pipeline so they can do their job. So let's talk about these different little pieces of the pipeline. We're going to start with talking about reference. Now, reference is critically important because it allows us to do our job well. The better and more accurate the reference is, the better and the faster we can build the things that we're supposed to build. Less than ideal or poor quality reference will actually slow us down. So good references are the utmost importance in terms of the speed and accuracy with which we can recreate whatever it is we're recreating. So we're always trying to get the best reference we can. Before I undergo a project, I go on my reference search, and it is not at all unreasonable for me to find 150 to 200 images of whatever it is I'm going to build from every possible angle. And if there's some movies out there so I can see some nice 3/4 in movement, I'm going to get those too. So I like to think of it as like a hunt. I'm hunting for this thing. So get as much reference as you can. But one thing I'd like you to do when you're looking at references, and we're going to have to train ourselves to do this, much like illustration, start looking at the objects and try to break it down to the primitive shapes that are inside of each object. Because in order to draw an object, you have to break it down to its simple shapes. Modeling very much like that. So we're going to be looking for the primitives that exist within the objects in our world that we're trying to build. Now, in terms of shape and form, it doesn't matter how complex the object is, organic or mechanical, it can be broken down into simple primitives. So just like illustration, we start with broad, simple strokes, and then we move into detail. Modeling is the same way, except we use, instead of illustration, we use polygon primitives, which we've already started playing with. They are the building blocks for everything we hope to make. Who can tell me what that is? That is the Millennium Falcon. How about this? How about that? Cat. I usually get one person who says dog. That's a cat, absolutely. What we're talking about here is silhouette. Silhouette is the shadowy outline that allows us to identify an object for what it is. It is critically important as a modeler. Job one is to hit silhouette, meaning when I look at the object you've built, from just its shadowy outline, I should be able to identify it for what it is. Does that make sense? Modeling is visual. It's about communication. I have to know what you've made. Make sense? Instant recognition by silhouette. Strong silhouettes are a good thing. Silhouette is so powerful that I can literally pick out different species of dog and different types of tree just from the silhouette. There's no surface detail there at all, but I know which one it is. That's how important silhouette is. Now, in terms of this class and grading, if you take a look at this scale, if this is the reference image we provide you with, this lamp, if you model a lamp for me that silhouette resembles the lamp to this degree, you're going to earn the points associated with silhouette. Yes, that looks close enough. You get those points for silhouette. These objects represent too far away from the original. They don't look enough like the original object. Therefore, you're not going to get the silhouette points. Does that make sense? Yes and no. Let's talk a little bit about form. Any questions about silhouette while we're talking about it? Again, this is the artistic component of modeling. Silhouette, what does it look like? Okay. Form. Form is the idea of surface detail, depth, 3D. This is where we're looking at the object with light on it. I see highlights, I see shadows, I see depth, I see details modeled in it. And all of these things help me see what it is that I've made. And form, also a graded component for the assets you're going to be building. So for example, if this is your reference image here, this lamp, you'll see these two lamps would meet the form requirement minimum in order to earn all the points for form, right? If you look at these lamps, although they're pretty good, they're too far of a departure. They're not close enough to the original to earn the form points. Does that make sense? Again, very yes, no. There is some flexibility, but we do have to have a hard line in the sand somewhere that says it looks too different. Does that make sense? And what we're trying to do is train your eye to see, recognize, and reproduce faithfully detail with no interpretation. Again, just like still life, except we're working with 3D. All right. Any questions on form, or are we pretty good on that? No? Silhouette? I couldn't have explained it that well. Come on. Really? All right. Let's talk about your skill check. Today's skill check, which again is a culmination of everything we talked about today, is the Captain Idaho Build Me project. Now, this is a skill check, so you know that there's a separate folder for skill checks, right? Just like the activity file folder, we have a skill check folder. So what's the first thing I'm going to need to do? Oh, you beat him to it this time. Set your project to the skill check folder. Again, you need to download that from FSO. But let's go through it. So here we are. Oh, go ahead, sure.
Do we need to save this file that we just made?
No, not at all. Thank you for asking that. These activities are just, again, to help you and I understand that we know you know what we're talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You don't need to save these. That's just for you. Skill checks you're going to need to save, and I'm going to talk about how to do that when we get to it. Great question, though. All right. So we go to File, Set Project, and of course, I'm going to go to my skill check file folder system and hit Set, because again, now Maya knows what I'm working on. And then I go to File, Open Scene. And I would say probably the biggest thing that confuses first-timers is they don't realize that setting the project and opening the file are two totally different ideas. Does that make sense? One says this is what we're working on, and the other says this is what I want to actually open up and start doing it. Does that make sense? Let's get on the same page versus, all right, here we go. So we get into Maya, and we select the Build Me assignment. Again, it's alphabetical, so it'd be towards the top, and I open it up. All right. Now, what you'll notice is the man is not looking so good. He's all kinds of blowed up. But our job is to fix him. Now, it's kind of tricky to tell what goes where, but who can tell me how I can figure out what something is called?
Clicking on the item and looking at the information.
You click on the item, and the information will be housed where? In the channel box. Whoa, strong performance from the front row. So if I select a piece of geometry, right up here I see, what does it say there? Potato body. So that's his potato body. How many of you guys have worked with a Mr. Potato Head before? All right, so I'm not the only one. Okay, just checking. You know, eventually they're going to stop making that thing, but I want to make sure we're on the same page. So I select Mr. Potato Head, right? And just looking at him, what do I think the problem is here? He's upside down, right? Now, you might not realize that, but the good news is we actually have reference images for you. It's on FSO. Let me see if I put it in my source images folder for the skill check as well. Let me just check. No, we didn't hide it in there, but it is on FSO. So let me open up FSO and let's make sure we are on the right activity here. I'm going to go to my skill check for lecture 1. All right. And here we've got some reference images. You can see there's Captain Idaho all blowed up. And here's a reference image that we can use as a guide. And if you look at this reference image, you'll see that the potato is wider on the bottom and narrower on the top, right? So if I look at over here, it's obviously upside down. And these are the eye holes, and that's the nose and the mouth. So what do I need to do? What do I need to do? Rotate them using the rotate tool. Ding, ding, ding. So I go to the rotate tool, and I flip him over. He's going completely over. So how many degrees is that? 180. So I could literally come over here and plug in 180 degrees. It's facing the right way. Make sense? Okay. So now let's get the next piece. Let's say I decide, you know what I really want to put on there is his nose. I can select the nose, and it tells me nose. But if I'm looking at all of these pieces and I'm getting scared, all right, I'm worried. Oh, no, where's the nose? Steve's going to be mad. Well, here's the thing. There's actually a window in Maya that will tell you what every piece is in the scene, and it's called the outliner. If you go to Window, Outliner, the outliner window lists everything in the scene. So I can either select the nose out here, and it will select it in there, or I could select the word nose in here, and it will select it out there. Does that make sense? That outliner is a terrific help. Under Windows. Most windows in Maya, so if you go to Window, you will see the outliner as a window you can open up. All right? So now I've got this nose. I'm really excited. It's time to move it into place. What tool should I use to move it? Move tool, right? Dun, 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 dun. All right? Again, I can eyeball it from perspective, but what should I really do? Go into my 4 windows, my orthographic views, and let me go to front. And what I'm going to do is zoom in tight, and I'm going to line up his nose. And I know that little peg probably goes in that hole, right? Odds are pretty good. So I'm going to use my side view, and what I realize is that my nose is not facing the right way. So what do I need to do? Rotate it. That's right. I'm going to rotate it. So I rotate my nose so that the little peg is pointed towards his face. And then now I can actually move my nose, although I'm off axis there. Move my nose into place and try to line it up. Now, if I look at my nose, it looks like it's in the right spot. But if I look at my reference image here, no, that's my slides. If I look at my reference image here, where'd you go? There we go. When I look at my nose, you'll see the nose is actually quite big. Let me zoom in a little. So you can see the nose is very large. It takes 2/3 of his face. But when I look at my nose, not quite big enough, right? What do I need to do? Scale it, right? So I select the object and I use my scale tool. Again, the hint on the scale tool. If I scale in a single axis, I get torpedo nose, right? If I scale in just Z, koala face. But I want the nose to stay like it is, so how do I scale the nose? You can't answer that one. What do I do? Middle, absolutely. So I'm going to scale from the center. Now that looks like the nose. Does that make sense? So now I can double check it against my reference image, because again, that's important. Looking good in the hood. So if it looks good here, and it looks good here, I know it's going to be okay out here. Make sense? Now, in terms of Mr. Potato Head, every piece you need is here. You don't need to create anything. You don't need to duplicate anything. Nothing like that. But what you do need to do is use translate, rotate, and scale to move the pieces around and rebuild Captain Idaho so that he looks just like, oh, that's my thing again. So that he looks just like the reference image here in these pictures. And you've got a perspective view, a top, a side, and a front so that you can make sure from every angle he looks right. Does that make sense? Hell yeah?
Hell yeah.
I know you're excited because you're not talking. It's like when you cook food for people and you put it in front of them, you're like, how is it? No one's talking. You did well because they're eating. So this is your skill check, and you can see this is a culmination of what we talked about today, right? Okay, now, in terms of this skill check, when am I going to check it? Friday morning, right after attendance. First thing is skill check. Do you still have to turn in the skill check?
Yeah.
Yes, you do. This is something you've got to turn in. It's on FSO. Now, it's true. The skill checks are only worth 1% of your grade. But let me let you in on a little secret. Number one, they're not that hard to do. They're pretty easy to do. But number two, and this is a big ticket item, if you do all of them, you've just earned a full letter grade increase on your final grade. So whatever grade you earn in the class, if you do all the skill checks, it just went up 1 letter. Does that make sense? That alone, if grades are what motivate you, that alone will make you want to do all the skill checks. Aside from the fact that that means you actually know what's going on in the class. But it will boost you by a full letter grade by doing all of these things. Does that make sense? So well worth it to do those skill checks on a number of different levels. Make sense? Hell yeah? Okay, great. So again, this is our goal. This is where we're headed. And I just want to open up the floor and ask if there are any questions. Is there anything that I can do for you guys? Online, I want to hear from you too. No hiding in the internet. Yes, go ahead. Saving the file. Thank you for asking because I wanted to touch on that. This is a very important thing for this class just because 2017 is a little squirrely. So in terms of saving your file, it is of the utmost importance you look and see what kind of file the original file was, because I give you many files to work on. When you make your own files, it doesn't make any difference. But when I give you a file, it is one of 2 varieties. It is either a .ma file or a .mb. Maya files come in 2 varieties. It's like chocolate and vanilla ice cream. They're both ice cream. It really doesn't make a big difference to you and I. MBs are smaller files because it's 1s and 0s. ASCII files could be opened as a text document because it's literally programming language in English. If you know and understand C++, you would recognize the syntax. But the point is, if the file you start with is an MA, when you save it, it has to be an MA also. It will not allow you to change chocolate to vanilla. Does that make sense? If you started with chocolate, it's got to be chocolate. And who doesn't like chocolate, right? So anyway, in terms of saving files, when you're all done and it looks fabulous and you couldn't be more proud of yourself, you go to File, Save Scene As. Does that make sense? Okay. When you go to File, Save Scene As, here's where you could change the variety. Maya ASCII, that's the MA file. Maya Binary, that's the MB file. So in looking at this, I can see this, the build me is an MA. So I have to make sure I set it for Maya ASCII. Make sense? Now I move into the naming convention that not only this class uses, but the entire school. So be prepared. You have to learn this way of naming things. So first you're going to name it last name underscore first name. Gold underscore Steve. Please put your name on the assignment, not mine. Every month I get people turning in work with my name on it. I could probably pass this class. I want to see how you do. So don't name it with my name. All right, Gold underscore Steve. Then we have to name the assignment. And this is my Lecture 1 skill check. Make sense? Lecture 1 skill check. underscore. What class is this? 3DF. 3DF. Underscore. What month do we have this class? What year and month? 1706 for 2017, the 17, and then 06, June. So it's 1706, and then all I have to do is hit save. Now, when I save this file, where's it going? It's going into my skill check file. Which folder? Scenes. Does that make sense? When you're looking for it, that's where it's going to be. Make sense? Thank you for asking that. In the scenes folder, that's where it's going to go. By default, it's going to send it there if that's where I set my project. And that's the big ticket item. If you set your project for elsewhere, it's going somewhere else. Make sense? And the good news is while you're saving it, it'll show you the path. See that? It's going to my scenes folder. So you can check it. Make sense?
Yeah.
Hell yeah? All right. So make sure that skill check gets done. I'll be looking that over first thing on Friday. And for my local class, incidentally, I don't like to bring up the sticks, but the truth of the matter is these skill checks are part of your attendance for the local class. So literally, if you don't do a skill check, you lose 2 hours of your attendance. So if you fail to do 4 skill checks, you just failed the class. Does that make sense? So that's kind of an unpleasant reality, but a reality nonetheless. Please do the skill checks. They are to your advantage in every variety. Does that make sense? Okay, so have them for me first thing on Friday, my local class. Again, you do still have to upload them to FSO to help up your grade. So good on all stuff. Any questions? I want to make sure. Yes, go ahead. Your what? That is correct. You are going to upload the file to FSO. And if you look at the activity, I actually outline the uploading process so that you can see how that works. The who? Oh, good for you. Yeah.
And like, I'm getting the peg holes. I'm getting the pegs to scale with peg holes.
Yes.
Not scale.
The question is, are the peg holes and the pegs exactly the right size? And I could see how you would make that logical deduction because that makes sense. Go by visually what looks right. You know what I mean? Here's the thing. 3D allows for precision on a ridiculous scale. And if we were modeling a car that was going to go into production, like General Motors was going to start building what we built in the computer, then you better make sure everything fits exactly or somebody's going to get hurt. Does that make sense? But luckily, we work in art and entertainment. So who cares? It doesn't make any difference. Make it look right. Does that make sense? And therein is the fine line. That's a great question. Does that make sense? Hell yeah? We're not building space shuttles. Nobody's going to get hurt. Yes? Not to make those things faster. There are some hotkeys. I don't go into too many of those early on because I want you to see everything. Have any of you guys ever been to New York City? You guys ever see those horses that pull the carts there? They have blinders on to keep them from seeing the taxi cabs that swerve all over the place. And here's the thing. That's for their safety, right? I don't really show you guys hotkeys right off the bat because hotkeys have a tendency to narrow your vision. You don't look for anything. You don't see anything. You hotkey. I want you to explore Maya's interface. I want you to go to those drop-down menus and see those other tools and wonder what they do. Does that make sense? So I don't give you the shortcuts yet. Will I? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because they're critical to the speed of workflow. But not just yet. I'll give you a couple here and there. All righty? Great question. Any others? Online?
There was one, how will lectures and field checks work with us not having class Monday?
Not having class on Monday. No big deal. Again, when we have a class, we make a lecture, we record it. You still have activities to do as we did in class, and you still have skill checks to do. Difference is yours are all supposed to be done by Saturday night. I'd like you to do them way sooner than that. But they're all due Saturday night. And for the local class, theirs are due Saturday night as well, but I check them in class visually each lecture before we do the actual lecture for the next material. So you all still have to do them. They are all still a responsibility and an essential part of the class in the understanding, but sort of how they're turned in and how they're scored, a little different for both. So, but good question. Anything else? We're good? Wow, that's a great question. Where's our lab? Let's talk about that. I've got like 1 second to do it. Shoot, I have less than 1 second. All right, you guys have lab, and it is in, that's not the one I want. 4B 127, okay. Have you guys been to Art yet? Art 1, same building, in room 127, which means you're gonna go to Art, you make a right, and down that hallway and on the right-hand side, 127. And the time for lab is 11 o'clock. So, right now. So, but no worries. You will never be late leaving here. Does that make sense? I will tell Marcus and Sarah, anytime you are late from here, that is on me, but you need the information. Make sense? All right, so get to lab, and they will fill you in on the stuff you need to know there. Thank you very much. Good first lecture. Let's do it again on Friday. 4B, same as Art 1. Same building. Yes. No worries. What's your last name?
I was panicking. I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fine. No worries. Today's the only day you get out of jail free.
Really? Oh my God.
All right. If you have any additional questions, I got to see you outside because I got to let the next class in. But thank you.